Imagine walking into a grocery store and finding almost nothing on the shelves. This was the reality for millions of Soviet citizens in the 1980s. The Soviet Union projected strength, but behind the Iron Curtain, a different story unfolded. The economy was in deep trouble. Official narratives emphasized success. Propaganda showcased smiling workers and bountiful harvests, but the reality was far less impressive. Shortages of basic goods became common. Long lines snaked around city blocks. Economic stagnation was a symptom of deeper problems. The Soviet Union's facade was beginning to crack. Empty shelves were a reminder of the government's failure. Economic hardship undermined public trust, setting the stage for collapse. For much of the 20th century, the Soviet Union stood as a superpower, a formidable rival to the United States. It had a vast territory, a powerful military, and a communist ideology that challenged the Western world. Yet, beneath this imposing exterior, the Soviet Union was grappling with fundamental weaknesses. Its centralized economy, while initially successful in industrializing the country, had grown increasingly inefficient and resistant to change. Political repression stifled dissent and creativity. The Communist Party held an iron grip on power, controlling all aspects of life. Citizens had limited freedoms, and any criticism of the government was met with swift and harsh consequences. This lack of political freedom bred resentment and apathy among the population. While the Soviet Union presented a united front to the world, it was, in reality, a patchwork of diverse republics held together by force. Nationalist sentiments simmered beneath the surface in many of these republics, particularly in the Baltic states and Ukraine. Years of economic hardship and political oppression had fueled these nationalist movements, creating further instability within the Soviet Empire. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union's problems had reached a critical point. The economy, burdened by a bloated military-industrial complex and inefficient central planning, was stagnant. The attempt to keep pace with the United States in the arms race had drained resources and diverted attention from pressing domestic issues. The Chernobyl disaster in 1986 further exposed the shortcomings of the Soviet system, highlighting its lack of transparency and its inability to handle crises effectively. Public discontent, long suppressed under the weight of state control, began to surface with greater frequency. People grew tired of shortages, tired of censorship, and tired of being told how to live their lives. The once unthinkable began to happen. Open criticism of the government, calls for reform, and even demands for independence from the Soviet republics. The Soviet leadership, accustomed to absolute control, seemed paralyzed by these challenges. The aging leaders who had guided the country for decades seemed out of touch with the needs and desires of the people. The Soviet Union was like a giant with feet of clay, its imposing facade masking a fragile foundation that was beginning to crumble under its own weight. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev, a relatively young and energetic leader, rose to power in the Soviet Union. Recognizing the dire state of the nation, Gorbachev initiated a series of reforms aimed at revitalizing the Soviet system. His policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, were intended to introduce limited freedoms and economic reforms. Gorbachev's reforms, while well-intentioned, proved to be a double-edged sword. Glasnost, intended to release some of the pressure building up in Soviet society, instead unleashed a torrent of criticism that the government was ill-prepared to handle. People were suddenly free to voice their grievances openly, and they did so with a vengeance. Perestroika, aimed at decentralizing the Soviet economy and introducing market-based reforms, faced resistance from entrenched bureaucratic interests. The reforms also led to economic disruptions and shortages, further fueling public discontent. Gorbachev's efforts to save the Soviet Union, ironically, hastened its demise by emboldening those who sought greater freedoms and ultimately independence from Moscow's control. The Cold War rivalry between the Soviet Union and the United States cast a long shadow over the 20th century. The relentless pursuit of military superiority placed an immense strain on the Soviet economy. While the Soviet Union sought to maintain parity with the United States in terms of nuclear weapons and conventional forces, this came at a tremendous cost. The Soviet economy, already struggling with inefficiency, could ill afford the burden of sustaining such a massive military-industrial complex. Resources that could have been used to address domestic problems, such as improving living standards or investing in infrastructure, were instead diverted to the production of tanks, missiles, and warplanes. The arms race was more than just a competition for military superiority, it was a battle of ideologies. The Soviet Union, seeking to prove the superiority of its communist system, poured vast sums of money into propping up communist regimes around the world. This further drained the Soviet treasury and entangled the country in costly conflicts such as the war in Afghanistan. The winds of change were sweeping across Eastern Europe in the late 1980s. Inspired by Gorbachev's reforms and emboldened by the Soviet Union's weakening grip, popular movements demanding democracy and independence gained momentum. In Poland, the Solidarity movement, led by Lech Walesa, challenged the communist government, ultimately forcing it to hold free elections. In Hungary, the government began dismantling the Iron Curtain, opening its border with Austria. East Germans, sensing an opportunity to escape communist rule, flocked to Hungary, creating a humanitarian and political crisis for the East German government. These events, unfolding in rapid succession, sent shockwaves through the Soviet bloc, demonstrating the fragility of communist rule. The fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989, a potent symbol of Soviet domination and the division of Europe, marked a pivotal moment in the Cold War. The once unthinkable had become a reality. The Iron Curtain, which had divided East and West for decades, was crumbling. The Soviet Union, weakened by internal problems and facing mounting pressure from within its own sphere of influence, watched helplessly as its empire disintegrated. Section 7, the August Coup, a turning point in history. In August 1991, as the Soviet Union teetered on the brink of collapse, a group of hardline communists, desperate to preserve their power, launched a coup against Gorbachev. The coup leaders placed Gorbachev under house arrest and attempted to seize control of the government. However, the coup was poorly planned and lacked popular support. The citizens of Moscow, inspired by Boris Yeltsin, the newly elected president of the Russian Republic, took to the streets in a remarkable display of defiance. They faced down tanks, erected barricades, and ultimately forced the coup plotters to back down. The August Coup, though short-lived, had a profound impact on the Soviet Union. It shattered the remaining vestiges of legitimacy of the Communist Party and exposed the deep divisions within Soviet society. The coup also propelled Yeltsin to the forefront of Soviet politics, positioning him as a symbol of democratic aspirations and a champion of Russian sovereignty. Section 8, the end of an era. The Soviet Union dissolves. The failed August Coup accelerated the disintegration of the Soviet Union, with the central government weakened and discredited. The constituent republics, sensing an opportunity to break free from Moscow's control, declared their independence one after another. On December 8, 1991, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus signed the Belavazia Accords, formally dissolving the Soviet Union and establishing the Commonwealth of Independent States, or CIS. The collapse of the Soviet Union marked the end of an era. It was a momentous event that reshaped the geopolitical landscape and brought an end to the Cold War. The Soviet flag was lowered for the last time over the Kremlin on December 25, 1991, replaced by the Russian tricolor. The once mighty Soviet Empire, which had spanned 11 time zones and encompassed a diverse array of cultures and peoples, had ceased to exist. Its demise left a void in the international system and ushered in a period of uncertainty and transition as the world grappled with the implications of a post-Soviet era. Section 9. Lessons from the ruins, what we can learn. The collapse of the Soviet Union offers valuable lessons about economic freedom, political accountability, and the dangers of unchecked state power. It highlights the unsustainable nature of a system that stifles individual initiative and suppresses dissent. The Soviet experience serves as a cautionary tale about transparency and the rule of law. It underscores the enduring power of ideas and the human desire for freedom. Despite decades of repression, the spirit of liberty ultimately prevailed. The legacy of the Soviet Union continues to shape the world today. Section 10, keep the conversation going, share, subscribe, and explore. The fall of the Soviet Union was a pivotal event in the 20th century. What are your thoughts on the factors that led to its demise? Share your perspectives in the comments below. For a deeper dive into this fascinating period of history, check out the documentaries and resources available on our channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest content. History is a conversation, and we encourage you to join the discussion.